Aquarius. There are moments in life when a very ordinary sentence suddenly makes the heart pause. A simple sentence. Nothing grand, not a promise, not even a clear confession, just something spoken out loud, as if someone has suddenly realized a quiet truth about themselves. You touch something in me, something no one else ever reached. At first it might sound like an emotional line, but behind those words, there can sometimes be a long, quiet journey of awakening. Because when someone begins to notice that their heart has changed, they also begin to look again at where they are standing in life. The choices they once believed were right, the paths that became so familiar, they no longer felt the need to question them. And then, a very honest thought slowly appears. I'm not happy where I am. Those words are not always about another person. Sometimes, they speak about an entire chapter of life, a chapter that once felt certain, but now no longer feels quite the same. So what is it that wakes a sleeping heart like that? What causes a quiet realization to rise so gently, yet feel so impossible to ignore? For Aquarius today, our story may begin right in that moment. There are sentences that, at first, sound completely ordinary. The kind of words that, on a different day, in a different moment of life, someone might simply smile at and let drift away like the wind. And yet, sometimes, a single sentence lingers a little longer in the mind. It stays. It quietly echoes in your thoughts late at night, when the world has grown still, or in those rare moments when life slows down just enough for a person to truly hear themselves. Aquarius, today's story may begin in a moment like that. A conversation that seemed completely ordinary. A passing glance. A feeling that is difficult to name. As if something in the air shifted ever so slightly. And then that person says something. Perhaps before they even fully understand what the words truly mean. You touch something in me. Something that no one else has ever reached. Those words carry no drama. No grand promise, no bold declaration about the future. They feel more like a realization, a quiet, unexpected realization, that somewhere inside the heart there has always been a door, one that even we ourselves may have forgotten existed. Yes, life has a way of drawing people into familiar rhythms, busy mornings, responsibilities waiting to be met, relationships continuing forward, simply because they always have. Everything keeps moving. From the outside, everything still looks fine. And yet, deep within the soul, there are places where certain feelings have almost fallen asleep. They rest there quietly, not demanding attention, not asking to be heard. Until one day, someone appears, not necessarily someone perfect. Not someone who arrives with dramatic words or gestures. Sometimes it is simply a person who sees the world a little differently. Someone who asks different questions. Someone who carries a kind of presence that makes the heart pause and listen. For many people, Aquarius tends to bring that feeling, a feeling that is strangely difficult to describe with words. You are not trying to be remarkable. You are not trying to persuade anyone. And yet, the way you think, the way you see life, the quiet freedom you carry within yourself, somehow invites others to begin looking inward. And in that moment, something may awaken, not a storm of emotions, not a dramatic transformation, more like a small lamp being lit inside a room that has not been opened in a long time. The light is not overwhelming, but it is enough for someone to realize that the room is still there, still existing, still waiting to be seen. And sometimes, what confuses a person the most is not the feeling they have for someone else. It is the moment they realize their own heart can still feel something new, something more honest, something deeper. So, when someone says, "You touch something in me," perhaps it is not a confession at all. Perhaps it is simply the sound of a door quietly beginning to open, a door leading toward questions that were never asked before. And once a door like that begins to open, the journey within a person may slowly begin to change. Perhaps it is from the very small moment that our story truly begins. There is something rather strange about human emotions. Years can pass. People keep living, keep working, keep moving through the familiar rhythms of life. without ever truly pausing to ask a very simple question. How do I actually feel deep down? Modern life sometimes feels like a train moving very fast. One schedule after another, one goal after another, everything unfolding the way it is supposed to unfold. Work seems fine, friends are still around, relationships continue. From the outside, life appears completely normal, and yet, somewhere deep inside, there can be a quiet space that is difficult to explain. A vague feeling, as if something is missing. Not a clear sadness, not a strong dissatisfaction, just a small emptiness. A quiet space that people are often too busy to notice. And until something very simple happens. Someone appears, not in a dramatic way, no movie-like moments, no extraordinary words, just an ordinary conversation, a passing glance, a moment when two people suddenly find themselves talking, as if they have known each other for a very long time. And strangely enough, that very ordinariness can change something, because in moments like that, people sometimes feel something rare, the feeling of being seen. Not in the sense of being noticed, but in the sense of being understood, being listened to without needing to explain too much, being in a conversation where everything simply flows. And then, somewhere in the heart, a question begins to form, a very small question. Why do I feel different when I'm around this person? At first, the question passes through the mind quickly. Just a fleeting thought, but then it returns, a second time, a third time. Until a person begins to realize that the feeling is no longer random, it becomes something like a mirror, a very quiet mirror, reflecting things that have never been examined closely before. And in that moment, a truth may slowly begin to surface. Not a shocking truth, not a dramatic conclusion, just a very honest realization. I'm not happy where I am. Those words can sound strong, but in reality, they often appear very gently, like a thought spoken out loud for the first time, like something the heart has known for a long time, but has only now found the courage to admit. It does not always speak about a specific person, and it is not always about a relationship. Sometimes it speaks about a chapter of life, a road that has been walked for far too long, a role someone has played for so many years. They almost forgot they once had other dreams. And when the heart begins to awaken in that way, the world around them can start to feel different too. Things that once felt easy to accept suddenly become harder to ignore. Emotions that were once pushed aside begin to return, clearer than before. Because once something inside has been awakened, a person can no longer fully return to the same silence as before. For Aquarius, your presence sometimes creates that kind of effect. Not because you are trying to change anyone, but because your sense of freedom, your unique way of thinking, and your quiet sincerity can feel like a fresh wind moving through the quietest corners of another person's soul. And when that wind passes through, a few old doors may begin to open. New questions begin to appear. Truths that were never spoken before start to find their way into the light. And perhaps it is from that moment that the real emotional journey finally begins. Each zodiac sign seems to carry its own kind of energy, its own color in the way it enters another person's life. For Aquarius, that energy is often difficult to describe with simple words. It is not the kind of attraction that comes from appearance, and it is not the kind of influence created by power or control. It feels more like a breeze, a gentle breeze, yet strong enough to change the atmosphere in a room. Many people, when they are around Aquarius, notice something unusual. They feel like they can breathe. They do not have to try to become a perfect version of themselves. They do not have to say all the right things. They do not have to hide their real thoughts. Because near you, they sense something rare, the freedom to simply be who they are. And the interesting part is, Aquarius is rarely trying to create that feeling. You do not enter conversations with the intention of changing someone. You do not try to steer the story in the direction you want. You simply show up. You show up with sincerity. You show up with your own unique way of seeing the world. You ask questions that people are not used to hearing. You look at situations from angles others may never have considered, and because of that, The person across from you sometimes pauses for a moment. They begin to wonder quietly, what am I really feeling right now? In a world where people often rush to give advice, rush to judge, rush to decide what is right and what is wrong, the presence of Aquarius can feel like a very different kind of space. A space where someone can slow down their thinking. A space where they can finally say things they have kept silent for a long time. Some conversations with Aquarius are not very long. They are not dramatic. Nothing extraordinary happens. And yet, after people walk away, they often carry a strange feeling with them, as if something inside their mind has just opened. A new perspective, a new thought, a new question about their own life. And sometimes, that is the most powerful thing of all. Not grand actions, not loud transformations, but the quiet ability to help someone turn inward and truly look at their own heart. It is a very quiet kind of influence, yet it spreads deeply. Because when a person begins to be honest with themselves, their entire life can slowly begin to change over time. For Aquarius, perhaps that is where your real gift lives. You do not need to play the role of a savior. You do not need to become the center of anyone's story. Your authentic presence alone is sometimes enough to create a rare kind of space. A space where people feel safe setting down their familiar masks. A space where someone can finally say, This is who I truly am. And when that moment happens, a new journey within their heart may quietly begin. There are moments in life when everything on the outside seems completely normal. And yet, inside, something has already begun to shift. Not a storm of emotions. Not a sudden life decision. Just a very subtle feeling. Almost like walking down a familiar road and suddenly realizing you may have been traveling that same road for far too long. What confuses people the most is not always change itself. Sometimes it is the moment they begin to sense that the old path may no longer truly fit the person they are becoming. That realization rarely appears in loud conversations or dramatic confrontations. More often, it arrives in quiet moments. Late in the evening, when the city slowly settles down, driving alone along a familiar street. A moment when the noise of the outside world softens just enough for someone to finally hear their own thoughts. And then, a very small question appears. A question no one else asked. The heart asks it. What if life could be different? At first, the question sounds simple, but sometimes it opens the door to thoughts a person had never allowed themselves to explore before. It is because once someone begins to question the path they are on, they also begin to look back at many things. The choices they once believed were right, decisions made during a very different chapter of life, roles they have carried for many years, so long that they almost forgot they once had other dreams. And those reflections are not always comfortable. Sometimes they create confusion, because realizing you may want something different means facing truths you may never have considered before. And yet, in those quiet moments of questioning, another door in life can begin to open. A door leading toward the possibility of change, not immediate change, not a dramatic turning point like something from a movie. Just a small shift in the way a person begins to see their life. And sometimes, that shift begins with a simple encounter. Someone appearing at exactly the moment another heart has started listening to itself. Aquarius may not even realize when this happens. You enter someone's life very naturally. You carry no intention of changing their direction. You are simply being yourself. And yet, the difference in the way you see the world, the way you ask questions, the way you choose to live honestly according to your own values, can quietly invite others to see life from a different angle, like opening a window in a room that has been closed for a very long time. Fresh air enters. Light touches corners that had never been seen before. And when that happens, people sometimes begin to realize something important, that life may not have only one path, that there may still be other possibilities, other directions, other choices they had never allowed themselves to imagine. You are not forcing anyone to leave their old road. You are not telling them they must change, but your presence can feel like a gentle reminder, a reminder that every person has the right to question their own life, that no one is permanently bound to choices made in the past, And sometimes, simply seeing someone living honestly as themselves is enough for another heart to begin believing that somewhere out there, a different path in life may still exist. There is something people often learn after many years of living. Not every emotional story is written with the clear endings we see in movies. Real life is often more subtle than that. It does not always offer a neat conclusion. It does not always provide an immediate answer. Some encounters appear only for a very short chapter of our lives. A few conversations. A few moments when two people truly see each other. And then life continues to move forward in different directions. At first that can feel confusing because we are often used to believing that if a feeling appears, it must lead to something specific, a relationship, a decision, a clear answer. But life does not always unfold in that way. Well, some people enter your life not to stay forever. They arrive like a breeze, a gentle breeze, yet strong enough to send quiet ripples across a still lake. They help you notice a part of yourself you may have never looked at before. Perhaps a hidden emotion, a dream that was once forgotten, or a very honest part of who you are, that the busyness of life made you temporarily forget. And sometimes the same thing happens in the other direction. You enter someone else's life, not to rewrite their entire story, but simply to awaken something small within them, a new thought, a new perspective, a new question about their own life. Encounters like these are rarely loud. They do not require grand promises. They do not need powerful declarations. And yet, years later, people still remember them. Not because of what happened, but because of how the moment made them feel. The feeling of being seen, of being understood, of having a very real part of their heart gently awakened. And sometimes, that alone holds deep meaning, because moments like that often leave a lasting mark, not the mark of attachment, but the mark of awakening. After encounters like these, people rarely see life in the same way again. They begin to ask more questions. They listen to their emotions more honestly. Things once overlooked suddenly become noticeable. Things that once seemed obvious are now seen from a different angle. And from those small shifts in perspective, new chapters of life sometimes begin to unfold. For Aquarius, your presence can carry that kind of meaning, not to control another person's story, not to decide where their life must go. Just a meeting, carrying a kind of sincerity strong enough for two people to recognize something about themselves. And even if life later carries them in separate directions, the imprint of that moment remains. A quiet reminder that along the long journey of life, some encounters do not need to last forever to leave a truly meaningful mark. And now, as our story gently arrives here, perhaps what remains is not a clear conclusion, just a quiet pause, a pause long enough for each of us to ask ourselves something in silence. If today's story touched even a small corner of your heart, perhaps it is simply a gentle reminder, like a reminder that the energy you carry through this life may be deeper than you sometimes realize, not the kind of energy that immediately captures the attention of the world, not the kind of light that demands every eye to turn, but something much quieter than that. Your sincerity, your freedom in the way you think, the way you look at life from a different perspective, sometimes a wider one. For you, these things may simply feel like the natural way you exist every day. Oh, but for someone else, they can become something unforgettable. There are encounters in life that do not last very long, and yet, the impression they leave can run far deeper than the time they existed. A conversation at exactly the right moment, a glance that makes someone feel truly understood, a moment when two people suddenly realize they are seeing the world through almost the same frequency. Moments like that are rarely loud. They are usually very simple. But that simplicity is exactly what makes them so real. And sometimes, just one moment like that is enough to help someone begin looking at their life in a new way. They may begin asking new questions. They may start listening to their own heart a little more closely. Not because you said something extraordinary, but simply because your presence made them feel that in this wide world, there are still people who dare to live honestly as themselves. And when someone witnesses that, they may begin to believe that they also have the right to do the same. So, Aquarius, sometimes the most important thing is not trying to become some perfect version of yourself. You do not need to guide anyone's path. You do not need to change someone else's life. Just be yourself. That authenticity alone is often enough to create the rarest connections in a lifetime. And if somewhere along your journey, someone once looked at you and said, there's something about you that makes me see the world differently, then perhaps that was never an accident. Perhaps it was simply one of the quiet, mysterious ways life chooses to work. Two people crossing paths, not to possess one another, but to recognize something within themselves. And sometimes, one moment like that is enough to make life feel much deeper than before. Thank you for sitting here in this story today. And if these words made you pause for a moment, or reminded you of someone along your own journey, then perhaps this story has found exactly the person it was meant to reach.